I think I belong to the generation before this machine was invented. So I have to be careful of using it. Ambassador Ong Keng Yong, distinguished audience. Ambassador, thank you very much for your kind introduction and for inviting me to speak in front of this distinguished audience. And ladies and gentlemen, I see some familiar faces in the audience. I apologize that I cannot address one by one and recall by name, but I see, how should I address you, Susan? A senior journalist, maybe, Miss Sim? And Mr. Fiati Cottage. And I see many in the audience wearing batik shirts. I'm anxious that they know more about Indonesia than I do. But I know all of you are so knowledgeable about Indonesia. Why is it? It's because the distance between Singapore and Indonesia is not far. But yes, as the ambassador has mentioned, for me here, back to the IDSS, I'm sorry, RSIS, which was the IDSS when I first was associated with the institution in 2003, and also to this very room. I was reminded by Professor Sebastian. I gave a talk here. For me, it's John Denver's "It's Good to Be Back Home Again." Yes. I really would like to start right away with your question, because I know you have a basic, strong foundation in your knowledge about Indonesia. But I don't think it would be fair that I do not start with some of my broad brush to refresh you about the military reform. So I just would like a few minutes to refresh you on the military reform of Indonesia, and maybe some of the context, the contemporary context of Indonesia. Then I would look forward to your questions and to our discussions. Yes, next please. I have a model for understanding Indonesia, although I have not defended this model in front of the board of professors, Ambassador. But I think it works. I think it works. So if you would like to understand about Indonesia, this is where Indonesia right now, of course, especially in a democracy, there are always the pros and cons, the likes and dislikes. But if there are some discontents here of what we see in Indonesia about maybe the policies of the government, and maybe we say that how should it be done? It could have been done better. So we refer to the national consensus, to the constitutional foundation of the country. This is to be put in our map as the reference as how it should be done. So it's the Constitution we go back to. But it does not guarantee that this will provide all the answers, because Indonesia did not come out of the blue yesterday or in 2018. We have a long process and time of history, and it's just not easy to cut off from our historical legacy. There are some of our practices that came from our historical legacy. For instance, I can give you an example of the military reform, the socio-political role of the Indonesian military. Maybe some of those who are not aware would directly be suspicious to say that the Indonesian military has a lust for political power, whereas it is not actually like that. Where did it come from? The political aspiration of the Indonesian military. It came from history. It came from history because Indonesia was a nation at arms during the struggle for independence. And then after our independence, we had various times of emergency where the military became the government. Either because of historical events like the destruction of the Communist Rebellion in 1948 or the various declaration of military and war emergency, where the military became the government. But also, this may not be the only argument. We see also that we have a long tradition of our culture, and of course that would influence on how Indonesians behave or act in their attitudes. So these are the three elements that we should be considered or should be considering if you want to understand Indonesia today. Next. Now this is, we start on the military reform. What I want to say here is that the Indonesian military reform practically went on relatively smoothly. So that is a very moderate statement. Practically and moderately. It's because, why was it done? Because the military reform was self-initiated by the military. It started from within the military itself. How could it be done? It started from the resignation of President Suharto, where it left a de facto political vacuum amongst the political elites. And again, practically, it was a strategic surprise for Indonesia, for Indonesians, especially for the political elite, while they were trying to figure out what sort of political system could succeed or replace the political system during the new order under President Suharto. It created a political vacuum for the military, and I don't know, it was for the better or for the worse that Indonesia was fortunate to have a very kind military, and while not involving or intervening itself in the political process, the military decided to think how it would play its role in the coming of democracy into Indonesia, and and the time was very fortunate to prepare for the new role of the Indonesian military in the coming of democracy of Indonesia. Why was it fortunate? The military can free itself from the push and pull of the political process, because the political elite forgot to check and to control on the military. And here we see that the military reform preceded the political and the constitutional reform. While the military reform started in 1998, 1999, the constitutional reform did not start until 1999, until 2002, and where it was completed. And it was not before the 2004 that Indonesia had implemented the result of the amendment of the constitution with the direct election by the people for the various elected public officials, the president, the head of the regions, the central parliament, and the regional parliament. So this is what I want to show you, that the military reform preceded the political reform, and it was a self-initiated reform. Next. What is the strategic value of the TNI reform for the nation? I would say that it supported the democratization process in Indonesia. If I'm asked what is the contribution of the military in the democratization process in Indonesia, or what did the military contribute to the democratization process in Indonesia, I would say that democratization in Indonesia was a political process with no intervention from the military. I would say that the more that the military did not involve itself in the political transition into democracy, the more that the military contributed to the peaceful democratic transition in Indonesia. Next. What role the military played in transition to democracy? As I have said, it was the NI self-initiated the reform, preceded the political reform. The NI terminated the dual function doctrine, leaving its socio-political role and liquidation of its representative in the parliament. So it was totally, the TNI totally left its socio-political role with all its form of implementation. The NI had no involvement in the political democratic transition. The less, this is what I have said, the less the NI is involved, the more it contributes to the democratic transition. Democratic transition was left totally to the politicians. Now, if we have hunches or discontent about the political transition, address it to the civilian politicians and don't address it to the military. And number 6 was TNI played the maximum role it can play in the democratic transition by not involving itself in the political transition. Next. What were the greatest challenges during Indonesia's democratic transition from the eyes of the armed forces? The military and the political reforms took place simultaneously, with no institution left to play the role of overseeing the reforms. Ideally, this is not a good model for any organizational change, especially in a democratic political system. Never let any operational institution to formulate their own policy. Or to decide for itself what it should do. But this is what TNI did during the reform. So this is not a good model, but again, as I've said, TNI took the opportunity to reform itself, because if it had not taken that opportunity, I doubt that TNI could have been reformed until now. And if the ideal was that the military should be reformed by the civilian political authorities, the civilian political authorities started the reform from the same starting line as the military. So that would not have been possible. Even now, the civilian institutions have lagged behind in reforms compared to the reform of the military. As a spillover of past arrangement and political culture, there is a tendency of civil and political authorities to seek political support from the military. Maybe this was a spillover from history, that the civilians were never given sufficient opportunity to practice their political power, and when the time came that the political power was handed over to them from the military, by the military, they were not prepared. Military reform was not conducted in gradual sequence. Moreover, due to limited time, the policy, implementation, and challenges from changing political environment created the need for multiple responses in a learning by doing situation. Actually, for the democratic transition, there was no plan. It was a surprise that President Suharto resigned, and there was not also a long-term plan or a gradual plan for the reform of the military. It was an impromptu action to see the opportunity, to take advantage of the opportunity. So it was more of a learning by doing, and full of improvisation and innovation. Next. The security sector's current support for Indonesian democratic transition, how is it? With the follow-up of the various legislations on positioning security forces in support, the security forces position in the democratic political environment mostly have been decided. And because of the fluid and open field for innovation and improvisation, and that we could say that not everybody had agreed on the changes that had been made. Possibilities are still open for those changes to come to a relapse. But we were lucky in Indonesia that those changes were directly locked into the legislation process, so that these new arrangements are now part of the new bills, which consist of the various of the many terminologies originating from the principles of democracy, where in the past they were not. Next, there are still some, not yet, unfinished issues to be completed, as such, putting the military commander. These are the unfinished symphonies. These are the unfinished elements of the military reform. We should not forget that the reform only was conducted between 1999 until 2004. Let's say it, between 20 and 2004. 2002 actually, and the military was always continuously tested with the new civilian political authorities. If we look back into that time frame of history in Indonesia, during that 5 years, we had how many, Michael? 3 or 4 presidents? 3 or 4 presidents. We keep changing. So it was a highly volatile and highly fluid political dynamics, and it was a test to the TNI, as though that the political authorities would say that, okay, this is the situation. You say that you are out of politics. If I do this, where do you put yourself? Where do you position yourself? Those sort of things keep coming to the TNI. That TNI did not have much time to really establish the process of the proper process of a change management. Next. How should the security sector contribute to sustaining democracy in a country? I think it's should open access to comparative studies of professional militaries. I don't think that any nation, any institution can proceed if they do not have comparison of how things are to be done in different ways in other places. They think that what they have would always be the best, and there is no need to look for comparative studies. So comparative studies are very important to open up our horizon, to see what are still to be improved in our system. Reviewing doctrines and software to focus on external threats moving from informed in domestic affairs. In the past, the military focused its role more into the domestic affairs. Because of the history as we saw it, but also was supported by the intelligence outlook during that time, which said that into the foreseeable future there would not be an open invasion by a foreign country. That was in line with the dual function that made the military focus more into the domestic affairs rather than looking outward, as it should be in the definition of external defense. Of course, allocating sufficient budget to support the building of required defense posture. This is not easy. It depends on how the economic climate situation is, and building civilian cadres to be knowledgeable in defense and military affairs, but being able to work together with the military. This is also we are still in the minor situation. There are just still not sufficient civilians who are familiar in the subject of defense matters and military matters, but not building that overconfident that now is the time of the civilians over the military, but being able to work together as part of the national system. Next. challenges to security sector reform and governance, lack of political will on the part of civil and political authorities to push for reform. And that right now, military reform, security sector reform, democratization is not a sexy topic anymore. It's not a sexy issue anymore. Now it has moved on to human rights, and as we see, as part of the dynamics of geopolitics there. Failure to establish the culture of democracy and democratic supremacy over security forces, because the politicians would like to have the support, the political support of the military. Although that they have won the election, maybe by a landslide victory, for the politicians, for the civilian politicians, they are not confident enough if they don't feel that they are having the political support of the military. The failure of democracy caused by incompetent civil and politician leaders may cause the public to turn to the military and lead the country for better results. We have seen examples of these in other countries, but what is the background process that can arrive at this situation? It is because that in time of transition, I always put it into analogy of a junction. Some of the believers would say, we go straight ahead. That is the right direction. No, we turn right. That is the right direction. No, we turn left. So we need a strong leader in time of transition. But the paradox of it is that while we need strong leaders, we are entering the transition into democracy. And democracy never promises strong leaders. So we have to pass that junction based on the leadership that was provided by democracy. And we should not forget that leaders provided by democracy is a matter of consensus of the voters, of the constituents. So it is more of the common denominator rather than providing the strong leader to make decisions in a time of transition. Next. Okay, the summary of the security sector reform. Key to success of democratic transition, that Indonesia has had a vibrant civil society before the start of democratic reform. If the reform can be said to be started in 1999, 2000, it does not mean that it was only in the year of 2000 that Indonesia starts its discourse on democracy. Discourse on democracy has started way before. Practically at the start of President Suharto assuming his presidency, because it was President Suharto who opened Indonesia into the international community. We remember that President Sukarno created a closed society. So it can be said also that the fall of President Suharto was he was made a victim of his own success by opening Indonesia. And this maybe is the difference, that if we compare with Myanmar, that they do not have those cadres inside their country, and vibrant society is yet to be developed at the same time as the opening of the country. The military self-initiated institutional reform leading to its non-involvement in democratic transition. Democratic transition was left, okay. Indonesia did not frame a new constitution, but only making amendments to the original constitution. That saved time, that saved energy, although it was debatable, but especially now, in hindsight, not because that it was debatable, but in hindsight, in a democracy, anything can be debated. And one of the things that are debated now is the amendment of the Constitution. The amendment, but we have come to agreement that the amendment should retain the basic value of the Republic, not changing Pancasila as the basic philosophy, while inserting forward-looking democratic principles. Next. Do we have influential external factors to the military reform? I would say yes. One is the access to comparative studies. Overseas education is important to see how other countries, other people do things in a different way. And it is not to copy, but it is to ask, to answer the question why and how. Why do they why do they do things in a different way? And how do they do it if they see that they have considered all the factors? Now, after that, it's only entering the phase of comparing those factors between the one in the country that we use as comparative study and in Indonesia. International cooperation here also implies some technological, we can learn from international cooperation and international assistance and consultations. Next. And we can say that actually that right now the challenge is how do we establish a national system that would be compatible with the international system. That will be the challenge now in a globalized world. We just cannot put ourselves, our domestic affairs in a closed situation like in the past, because of the openness and the waning of national borders in solving problems. So anything that we try to establish as a national system, we have to consider that it should be compatible with the values and systems by the international community. Okay, challenges surrounding the process. The resignation of President Suharto created a strategic surprise. It was a total strategic surprise which no element was prepared for in Indonesia. No prior plans for the transition. The military reform preceded the political reform. The military and the political reforms practically was a parallel process through learning by doing. No sufficient time in preparing institutional capacity for the new roles, meaning that we would prefer for a gradual process of transition by preparing those institutions who would take over the roles that in the past had been done by the military. But we did not have time for that. So again, it was learning by doing. Next. Common challenges: preparation of civilian political institutions, establishing new democratic culture in the society, and finding the way to national reconciliation. Next. Well, now we see we make a quantum leap. This is for the 2017, 9th of June 2017. TNI was the most trusted government institution by the public. It was approaching 90%. And why was this? Was it because that TNI is really that improved? I think one of the argument or one of the rationale is that the result of the reform, that the military had been separated from its interaction with the society, so that challenges and fatal attractions for wrongdoings by the interaction with the society was kept or was made to a minimum for the military, because it had withdrawn from its socio-political role. Things might have been different if they would have retained the socio-political role. One other fact that could prove that is that the police suffered as one of the institutions that was mistrusted by the public, because it is the constitutional role of any police institution in any country to always stay interacted with the society, and that created challenges and also fatal attractions. Next. Now, we move to the current administration, current continuing modernization plan. Specific guidelines for is to reach defense self-reliance, transfer of technology for strategic industry, dual use of industries to ensure development for long-term use, and integration in interoperability of weapon systems. Now, the current administration is only halfway of the first term, maybe moving into 2/3 of its term. So this is more of the stated policy rather than we see of the implementation of the policy. The challenges, as usual, allocation of required budget to compete in priority with other sectors, planning to raise the budget of defense to 1.5% of GDP, which again is not easy. B, providing the allocated budget to be prioritized for support for defense entities as opposed to personnel cost. Next. We use much of our defense budget for personnel cost. Maritime vision strategies. President Joko Widodo was the first Indonesian president to publicly announce a maritime strategic policy. It is a move in the strategic culture to move away from the agricultural culture into maritime culture. Key objective to enhance. It is actually addressed and directed internally to the national interest of Indonesia, although it is called the Global Maritime Fulcrum, but actually it is intended to improve things that are required to the national interest of Indonesia. And those are key objective to enhance inter-island connectivity, including upgrading of port infrastructure to open up interconnection to national economy. It was stated in the Defense White Paper for the first time, 2003 and 2008, primarily for the protection of maritime assets, sea lanes and territorial waters from non-traditional security threats and external incursions. Coordination of minimum essential force project. The challenges encountered centers on limited resources. Defense budget have improved from 0.5% to 0.9% in 2019, still constitutes less than 1% that the government would like to have of the national GDP. It is hoped to be raised to 1.5% of GDP within 5 years, which is not easy. Next. 5 pillars of President Jokowi's maritime strategy. The cultural pillar, as you are able to read, the economic pillar, a developmental pillar, the diplomatic pillar, and the maritime defense pillar. Next. What is the meaning of Jokowi's maritime vision and strategy? It is a gradual shift into a new security perspective, moving away from the long-standing practice of army based on territorial defense, underscores an emerging political consensus that the country must be ready to face external security threats perceptions, prioritizing and strengthening of defense posture in the Natuna waters vicinity. Indian Ocean has figured as one of the priority agendas of regional cooperation. It revolves around engendering comprehensive maritime cooperation and playing proactive role within Indian Ocean Rim Association. Poses as a reminder of the revival of Indonesia's archipelagic identity through a call for a united Indonesia for a new expectation for national maritime awakening. Next. Initial steps and challenges. Initial steps we have seen are about the creation of new key ministers in the cabinet. Still requires a strong national policy support, and there is the need for a comprehensive and detailed blueprint of the policy, the creation of an efficient local infrastructure, and a positive image for international investment. Next. Conclusion, okay. I think you can already form yourself a conclusion of my presentation. To save time for the discussion, I conclude my presentation there and look forward to the discussion and your questions. Thank you very much for your attention.